That's better. Okay, so very warm welcome everyone this morning to our Sleep Your Way to Better Health webinar. So this is a nice bite-sized session. It's actually Sleep-tember. So September is the Sleep Charities Awareness Month for Sleep and Wellbeing. So it's quite timely to have this on this morning. So again, thank you for joining. Thank you all for being so prompt today. Thank you for those that introduced themselves in the chat as well. It's always nice to see the range of organisations that we have attending. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We will be using the chat function. So if you haven't used Zoom for a while, along the bottom you'll see a little speech bubble. Apologies that this diagram is actually from Teams, but it looks very similar. So if you click on that, you can type a question or message. Sean will be keeping an eye on those and we'll go through some of those at the end. And please do stay on mute while I'm talking, particularly if you're in an open plan office for any background noise. Feel free to grab a drink. If you need to step away and take a break at any point, that's fine. And do take notes through this session. We'll send out some bits and pieces afterwards for you, but obviously take notes as we go along. We just want you to get the most out of this session this morning. So what we're going to be looking at this morning, we're going to have a little look at our sleep guidelines, what recommendations are, look at how sleep can impact our health and performance. We'll share some top tips for a better night's sleep and share some additional resources with you. And we'd just like to say that I'm not a sleep expert, I'm a public health practitioner. I've done a number of bits of training on sleep and mental health. So if there's questions outside my scope of practice, I'm happy to take them away and find out from an expert. We also won't be looking at particularly sleep disorders. There are so many that would be a sort of separate session, and it's sort of a more clinical thing. So if you have got questions on sleep disorders, then we can perhaps signpost you to some different resources that might be useful. So first of all, there's stages of sleep which you may have heard of. So when we go to sleep at night, there are different stages of the sleep cycle. And each cycle lasts about 90 to 120 minutes, so about an hour and a half to 2 hours per sleep cycle. And the two distinct the sections in that sleep cycle are REM sleep, so that's rapid eye movement, and non-rapid eye movement. And within the non-rapid eye movement, so the NREM, there are 3 stages. N1, which is actually when you just first of all fall asleep here. So it's about 5% of our sleep is this. So it's about 1 to 7 minutes, and that's the phase when we can easily be woken up. So perhaps if you fall asleep in front of the TV, or you've just gone to bed and you hear a loud noise, that's when we're easily woken up. And then the next stage, N2, that's when our brain activity slows and our body starts to relax. Those stages get longer through the night as well. And then stage 3, it's when our deep muscle tone decreases, muscles relax, and this is the restorative sleep that we get at night. This bit here, the N3, supports creativity and memory. If you don't sleep well in this section, you can often have problems concentrating and thinking the next day. So our stage 3 lengths seem to get shorter during the night. And then stage 4, our REM sleep, it starts off as about 10 minutes in the first cycle and actually ends up being 60 minutes by the end of the night. These stages get longer in the night, and it's in this sort of stage 3 and REM sleep that we're more likely to feel groggy if we get woken up. And there are real consequences of having to wake up earlier if we're not getting enough sleep. So you might have to get up 2 hours earlier, perhaps if you've got an early meeting or a flight. You might think, oh, actually 2 hours out of my 8 hours sleep, that's only 25% loss of my sleep. But actually what you'll find is you're actually losing more of the restorative sleep and more of your REM sleep, because these cycles get longer through the night. If you wake up earlier, they're being cut short, and that can impact both our physical health and our mental health. So just some interesting points. We dream mostly during our REM sleep. We all wake through the night, and that's normal. So you may not fully wake up, but you might stir sort of in the N1 stage and might be not so deeply asleep. If we don't get enough sleep, our physical and mental health suffers. It can affect our memory, concentration, immunity, growth and repair, as we'll look at a little bit later on. And these non-rapid eye movement stages and one REM sleep make up a cycle. So with each cycle said lasting an hour and a half to 2 hours, then most people will have 4 to 6 cycles per night. And these allow the brain to sort of recapture the day, support multiple functions. If we think of the brain like a computer, during our sleep stages, our brain is filing away what's important, binning off things that aren't, and also we're restoring our muscles and our bones. Our bones are restoring themselves and healing, and different things such as age, sleep patterns, alcohol and sleep disorders can impact our sleep cycles, and improved sleep hygiene can help us through these stages, which we'll look at as we go through this session today. So that's stage 1 as a recap. That's the lightest phase of sleep. Stage 2, the most substantial, and actually one that psychologists and sleep experts know the least about. Stage 3, that's that restorative process. This is where children grow when they're asleep. And if you've, as an adult, have sort of perhaps an injury, that's when your muscles and bones will heal themselves. And stage 3 is where mostly dreams occurs and our emotional memories get processed. So if anyone would like to use a chat function, would anyone like to guess how many hours adults should get each night? So if you feel free to unmute yourself if you're confident to do so, or if you just want to use the chat function, that's absolutely fine as well. Oh, thank you, everyone. I always like it when there's some answers coming through. So we've got a range of sort of 7 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours. So as we see on this here, so for adults, young adults, sort of 18 to 25, it's 7 to 9 hours, and the same for adults aged 26 to 64. Usually older adults need slightly less sleep, but it's interesting, I just sort of to see how much more sleep people need when they're younger. So as we know, babies need a lot of sleep, they're growing and developing rapidly. As we age, we need less sleep as we're not growing anymore, but we still need that sleep for restorative purposes, for healing, for our brains to process memories and so on. So sleep is essential. Repairs to the body and memory consolidation occur when we sleep. The quality of sleep does vary as we get older, and the quality of sleep can diminish as we age. So there's hormones, which I'll talk about in a minute, which control our sleep, and the production of those does decline with age. Sleep deprivation, defined as inefficient sleep or sleeplessness, is a condition of not having enough sleep. So that can be chronic or acute, and it might vary wildly. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't sleep anywhere near 7 or 8 hours a night, sometimes we're keeping a sleep diary just to see how much you are sleeping and if you're getting enough. But one way we can tell if we're getting enough is to ask yourself, do you rely on an alarm clock to wake up? After waking up, could you fall back to sleep before 11 a.m? And can you function well without caffeine before noon? So if you do rely on an alarm clock to wake up, you could fall back to sleep before 11, and you're relying heavily on caffeine before noon, you're possibly not getting enough sleep, and you might want to start sort of keeping a sleep diary and looking at things you can do to improve your sleep hygiene in order to making sure that you are getting enough rest. So what controls our sleep? So there are 3 things that control our sleep, and the first one is our biological, or sometimes called our circadian rhythms. So back in 1938, Professor Kleitman, a research university in America, took his research assistant and decided to be their own guinea pigs. They took plenty of food and water, and they spent 32 days in a cave with no detectable sunlight. They lived in their cave for 32 days, measuring their body temperatures and their waking and sleeping rhythms. And even though they were cut off from the daily cycle of light and dark, they stayed more or less in the same rhythm of waking and sleeping for about 9 hours each night. So scientists recognise that we have these biological rhythms, and because of those rhythms, that's when we need time to adjust, perhaps if we go on holiday and there's a different time zone, and why we experience jet lag. And there are also 2 different sort of types of circadian rhythms. So some people will be more awake in the evening, so night owls, and some people more awake in the morning, larks. So it's just what's normal for you, but trying to sort of maintain our biological rhythms will really help us to sleep better. Another thing that controls our sleep is our routine. So anyone that's a parent will know that babies love a routine. So you bath, bottle, or feed them, breastfeed them, and put them to bed. And actually as adults, we're not really any different. Our bodies still use cues to tell us it's time for bed. So a routine might be exercise, taking a warm bath at a regular time, food, a social interaction. I mean, how many of us might fall asleep watching the 10 p.m. news? Our bodies and brains learn these cues for sleep. So having a consistent routine can help us get to sleep better, and maintaining a regular bedtime as well. And then the third thing that controls our sleep is hormones or sleep pressure. So there are 2 hormones that are involved here. So melatonin, sometimes called the hormone of darkness, that gets released at night. It tells your body it's time to get ready to sleep. The levels in our blood increase as it gets dark, usually peaking in the early hours of the morning. And the second hormone that affects our sleep is called adenosine. It causes pressure and it builds up in the brain, slowing down all our wakeful areas and turning up sleep-inducing regions. So adenosine levels usually peak about 12 to 16 hours after we first wake up in the morning. So if you woke up at 7 a.m., levels would start to rise between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. Adenosine only clears from our brain when we have slept, and caffeine blocks adenosine. So that's why when you have a cup of coffee, if you're tired, it sort of kicks in. But when it wears off, you then feel really sleepy all of a sudden, because once the caffeine's cleared from our brain receptors, that adenosine is still there. So these three things, our biological rhythms, that routine, and those sleep hormones, they all help us to fall into a sleepy state. So as we get older, sometimes melatonin production lessens, and some people might find they need supplements, which you can get from a pharmacy. But just to say, if you think that applies to you, do seek some health advice from a health professional, GP or pharmacist before you sort of start taking these things, to make sure there's nothing else going on there. So signs of sleep deprivation, again, using the chat function, can anyone share any common things you notice that you do when you're sleep deprived? Anything that sort of how sleep deprivation might affect you?
Do you want to just chat, Michelle, or do you verbal?
Either actually, Pete. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, please feel free to use the chat. I know a few people are, but if you want to unmute and join in, that's absolutely fine as well.
No, just to say, yeah, all the stuff that people are saying on the chat. So exactly the same.
Yeah, some really good answers here. So we've got nodding off, moody and can't think straight, brain fog, irritable, tearful, grumpy, confused, unable to learn new information. Absolutely. Grumpy and tearful, moody again, headaches, forgetfulness. So lots of things that can be a sign of sleep deprivation. Argumentative, less able to cope with everyday tasks. So there's lots of common signs of sleep deprivation. So I'll just click here now and it'll bring up a little graphic for us. So we've got yawning, we've got irritability, fatigue, depression, moodiness, forgetfulness as mentioned, difficulty concentration definitely mentioned. And one thing I don't think was in the list there was increased appetite. So actually when we don't sleep properly, our hunger controlling hormones are interfered with. So we won't produce enough hormones to tell us that we're full up when we eat, and we'd also crave more energy rich foods because our body's feeling tired. So it's going to make us crave more sort of maybe biscuits, cake, sugary items to get that boost of energy to keep us going through the day, which okay is probably okay on the odd day, but if that happens consistently over a number of weeks or months, that can lead to weight gain. So it might be worth sort of trying to, if you have had a bad night's sleep, drinking plenty of water and filling yourself with healthy, nutritious choices to sort of counteract that. So clumsiness, if we don't sleep well, we can be more inclined to have accidents, which we'll look at in a moment. Reduced sex drive, lack of motivation, and increased sickness. So if we think of sleep as our body's equivalent, as I said, to a computer reboot, if we don't get enough sleep or good quality sleep, we're missing out on all of this recovery and rejuvenation to help us tackle the next day. We become more accident prone due to tiredness and difficulty concentrating. And a good night's sleep is restorative and plays a significant role in healing. So it repairs the heart and the blood vessels, supports our immune system, and gives our cardiovascular system a rest, allowing other organs to be restored. So there's lots more information on the link that's there on the page from the Sleep Charity, so you can read up a bit more on that, or how all those different things do play that part with sort of signs of sleep deprivation. But when you think about it, there's actually so many impacts on our sort of on the next day in terms of sleep deprivation, and that's just in a sort of short term, perhaps 1 or 2 bad nights, but unfortunately some people might experience it over a longer period, and longer term sleep deprivation can impact our health in a number of ways, which I'll come on to on the next slide. So if you don't sleep very well over the long term, it can actually decrease our life expectancy. So people who sleep for less than 6 hours every night have 13% higher mortality, a lowered immune response, reduced cognitive function, a lower libido in men and women. I know that was on the last slide. Lower testosterone levels, and a decrease in reproductive hormones, which can lead to a difficulty conceiving, things like reduced sperm count for men. So there's lots of impacts on that lack of sleep. And also not sleeping properly will give us an increase in the likelihood of being obese. So if we sleep regularly for less than 7 hours, we're 30% more likely to be obese than adults who sleep for 9 hours. Again, down to that the interruption of our appetite controlling hormones and the seeking out eating sweet foods to keep us going. We're at higher risk of depression and anxiety if we sleep for less than 6 hours a night. And the type 2 diabetes risk increases for those who sleep for less than 5 hours. So some really quite significant health risks by just not sleeping, which is something that some of us might take for granted. Risk of heart disease increases. It increases our blood pressure, which then increases our heart rate and inflammatory markers. As I said, when we sleep at night, our bodies are restoring themselves. So our bones are healing and restoring themselves, keeping themselves strong. So actually not sleeping for less than 6 hours a night gives us an increased risk of osteoporosis and also an increased risk in the likelihood of developing dementia. So in terms of things like immunity, a prolonged lack of sleep will affect our immune system. So people who sleep for less than 7 hours a night are more likely to catch a common cold by 30%. So it really goes to show how restorative sleep can be and how it can help us to maintain our health. So it's just something that we definitely ought to be protecting more and not taking for granted. People, you might hear sort of famous people or saying, oh, sleeps for the week, or one example, like Margaret Thatcher used to sort of brag about how she didn't sleep very well, but she actually ended up with dementia. So that just goes to show that she probably wasn't doing the best for her health. So actually, if we can protect our sleep, it can have such a big impact on the rest of our well-being. So other things to consider. So there are health conditions that affect sleep. As I said, we're not going to dwell on sort of sleep conditions, but insomnia is one of them. So a third of people in the UK do suffer with some type of insomnia. Mood disorders, depression, anxiety can impact our sleep, and sleep can impact them. Menopause can affect sleep, diabetes, musculoskeletal disorders, cardiovascular disease, asthma, thyroid function, heartburn, or sometimes known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, and restless leg syndrome. So if you experience or live with any of these conditions, it's worth keeping an eye on your sleep and speaking to your health professional if you need extra support. And with insomnia, just want to sort of say, like, if it lasts for more than 4 weeks, I would suggest speaking to your GP, because that's sort of then going beyond the realms of just like a short period of interrupted sleep. And obviously there are external factors that can affect our sleep as well. I'm sure a number of us will recognise things here. So if you share a bed with a partner, that can affect your sleep. Pets, the bed or environment. So we want to be looking for a sort of comfortable mattress, a nice temperature in the room. Noise pollution, so if you've got noise outside your property or perhaps in a neighbouring flat. Children and stress. So all these things can have an impact. So we need to think about how they might be impacting us and what we can do to alleviate some of those pressures. So as we said, mental health and sleep are quite well connected. A close relationship between them, and how we have how mental health can impact our sleep, and poor sleep can have a negative impact on our mental health. So this little graph here from Mental Health First Aid England shows that poor sleep leads to worrying leads to poor sleep. And worrying about sleep is like your mind trying to fight itself, a horrible place to be. And obviously the more sort of sleep deprived we become, having that lack of restorative and lack of REM sleep, increasing the anxiety and the impact on our mental health. So lack of sleep leads to tiredness, difficulty coping with daily life, low self-esteem, feelings of stress or worry, and then it can become a bit of a vicious cycle. So you might find you have a sleep problem if you have negative thoughts, feel depressed or anxious, if you're lonely or isolated. And again, if you recognise any of these things in yourself, definitely recommend speaking to a health professional, because it doesn't have to be this way. You can get support and help to sleep better and therefore improve your mental well-being. And as I mentioned, menopause can have an impact on sleep. So 12% of non-menopausal women will experience sleep complaints, compared to 40% of women in their 40s and 50s, again caused by fluctuations in hormones, changes going on in their body. So it's worth having a think about how hot flushes, insomnia and other menopausal symptoms might be impacting your sleep, so that you can address those and give yourself the best opportunity to sleep well. Treatments can include things like low-dose antidepressants, CBT, and increasing phytoestrogen. So that's estrogens in our food, such as soy milk, tofu, nuts and seeds. Again, worth having a bit of a look into if that's something that relates to you. Now I'm going to go on to having a look about how sleep affects our performance. So we've heard how bad it is for our health, but just to sort of get to the end of the doom and gloom bit in a minute and think about what we can do to improve our sleep. But have a think about how sleep impacts our performance. So as I said, 1 in 3 people were affected by insomnia. But some of these other things will just sort of highlight how important it is to protect our sleep, because we can't recoup lost sleep. You'll never make it up, and you can't clear a sleep debt fully or build it up in advance of a late night. Whilst you can if you know you're going to have a late night, it's worth having a good rest beforehand so you don't go into it tired. You can't bank it in advance, so to speak. So 16 to 18 hours is the number of hours we're awake before reaction times become similar to the legal drink driving limit, which actually think about what time you got up in the morning, and if you've gone out for the evening, what time you might be driving home. That's actually not really that long. That's quite a sort of stark figure. And you're 4.3 times more likely to be involved in a car accident if you're driving with having had less than 5 hours sleep. So if you don't have to drive and you've had less than 5 hours sleep, it might be worth perhaps working at home or using public transport or getting a lift just for that sort of extra bit of safety. And it comes back to that making us more accident prone if we haven't slept well. And 200,000 not working days are lost due to insufficient sleep. So if we can encourage people to sleep better, it's going to be good all round. We're going to feel better in ourselves, be healthier, and be more productive as a country, which I think is really important. So people who spend 5 to 6 hours in the week and try to catch up on their sleep at the weekend don't really reduce their risk of early death, because you actually can't catch up on that lost sleep fully. So you'll be pleased to know we're going to have a look at some good things we can do to actually improve our sleep and well-being. So if you've got your own tips that you want to share in the chat, please do so as we have a look through these ones here. So having a regular routine, as I said, avoiding sleeping more than 1 to 2 hours on the weekend with lying so that doesn't interrupt your sleep in the week, and having that regular routine of cues to sleep, just like a baby, having a bedtime routine where you perhaps have a bath or listen to some music or use aromatherapy candles. Exercising regularly can help us to sleep better. So moderate exercise is one of the most non-affected sort of drug treatments, but we would say to avoid vigorous exercise in 3 hours before bedtime, because then if you're doing vigorous exercise, that's releasing too much adrenaline, which will then keep you awake for longer. Perhaps trying some gentle exercise. Getting daylight, so getting daylight during the day is a really good way to tell our bodies it's daytime when it is daytime, so that in the evening as it starts to get dark, it will encourage better sleep at night. So if you do work from home or you work indoors, try to get out for a walk perhaps in the morning or during lunchtime, as that can help to reset our body clocks. Creating a better environment. So ideally we'd like our bedrooms to be about 18 to 24 degrees, dark, quiet space. Obviously with the weather we had like earlier this week and over the weekend, that might have been a bit of a challenge for some. So just doing what we can to make our bedrooms more comfortable, perhaps changing the duvet, wearing thinner pyjamas, cotton pyjamas and so on. Checking the age of our mattress and pillows. So ideally we should be changing our mattress every 8 to 10 years, washing our pillows regularly and changing them, because the more comfortable we are, the easier it will be to sleep. And try to have bedding made from natural fibres as well. But if you do struggle to sleep, the recommendations would be to get up and do something relaxing outside of bed if you have trouble falling asleep, so that you're not sort of lying there fretting, looking at the clock. Avoid watching TV, using phones and iPads, perhaps just go to another room. Things like doing some breathing exercises can help, perhaps reading a couple of pages of a book until you start to feel sleepy again, and then go back to bed so that your body learns when you're in bed, it's for sleep. And then cut down on caffeine. So particularly in the evening, caffeine has a half-life, so it always makes it sound radioactive, but whatever caffeine you drink, so if you drink a cup of coffee at 12 o'clock, half of that caffeine will still be in your system at 6 o'clock in the evening. If you have a cup of coffee at 7 o'clock in the evening, half of that caffeine will still be in your system at 1 in the morning. It doesn't affect everyone in the same way. Some people are able to metabolize it more quickly, but just keep an eye. If you think you're sort of struggling to get to sleep or waking up not long after going to bed, it could be due to the caffeine. Just keep a diary of when you last drank caffeine, what you had, and see if there's any sort of patterns there, and try to cut down, perhaps switch to a decaffeinated tea or a herbal tea of an evening. Other things, so food and alcohol. So having too sort of heavier food at bedtime or close to bedtime can make us uncomfortable. And alcohol, so lots of people might be sort of familiar with the idea of having a nightcap, but actually whilst alcohol might make us feel sleepy, it really significantly impacts our restorative sleep. So it will be a sedative and make us feel sleepy, but it isn't a sedation. Sedation is not the same as sleep. It will not aid natural sleep, cause more light awakenings during the night, and blocks and reduces the quality of our REM sleep, which is essential for our emotional and mental health, as I've already said. It might also make you get up in the night for the bathroom, which is not going to lead to a good night's sleep. And we've got any smokers in the room, so smokers will take longer to fall asleep and wake up more frequently because nicotine is a stimulant. So the best thing would be to obviously give up smoking, or perhaps to try some lower dose nicotine e-cigarettes in the evening. And our local stop smoking service is there to help if you want to give up and be smoke free. And reducing screen time, implementing screen time of 1 to 2 hours before bed. Lots of devices give out a blue light, which is a way it's telling your eyes that it's daytime and tricking us into thinking that it's still time to stay awake. So if you do use a screen, try to use a blue light filter and review relaxing content. If you're watching stuff on phones, which is sort of stimulating, again, it can help stop you from switching off. Marijuana, going back to smoking, so some people might use certain drugs to help them fall asleep, but again, marijuana will block the restorative and REM sleep, which can further lead to anxiety and mental health issues. So obviously we're not to advocate any drug taking anyway, but being smoke free and drug free would be the best thing for our sleep. Writing it down, if you lay in bed and you feel yourself worrying about what you've got to do the next day or what you haven't done that day, keeping a little notepad by the bed can be really helpful. You can jot those things down and park them for the next day. And then just allowing time to wind down. So listening to quiet music, stretching and meditating can all be really helpful. Did anyone have any sort of additional things that they've tried themselves which are useful for a good bedtime routine or to help them sleep better? Just pause for a minute in case anyone wanted to add anything to the chat function. Yeah, room temperature, that's really important. It's definitely a struggle after the last spell of hot weather, but things like using fans or keeping the curtains closed during the day to keep the sun out of rooms to stop it sort of getting quite so hot. The sad lamps in winter, they can be really useful for some people. Thank you. Yeah, quiet music, that's really good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, good self-care routine, bath, brush teeth, brush hair, moisturize face mask. It's just all these things that give our body the cue, like it's time for bed now, time to wind down now. They can be really helpful in getting off to sleep. The way that I like to be. Yeah, thank you everyone. So I don't know if we've got any shift workers on the call today. We're just going to have a little look about how shift work can impact our sleep. Obviously, sometimes we're not all fortunate enough to have a 9 to 5 job. Sometimes we do need to sleep at different times, or perhaps if we've got an early flight to catch, we might need to go to bed earlier. So when you're prepping for a night shift or sort of an interrupted night, it's good to maintain that good sleep routine up to that. Whilst I said you can't bank sleep in the 24 hours before, what you can do is try to rest and have a good restful day in the 24 hours before, so that you're not going into that night shift already tired. So before the night shift, perhaps exercise in the morning to encourage that early nap in the afternoon, so you're as fully rested going into that as possible, and make sure you're well fed and hydrated so that you're not hungry, and that your hunger hormones are all nicely in balance before you enter the night shift. During the night shift, or if it's getting up early for a flight or something, resist the temptation of high sugar fats and foods. During breaks, have a short nap if you can, and use caffeine carefully. So as we said, caffeine has that half-life where half of it's in your system sort of 6 hours after consuming it. So if you're on a night shift, try to take the caffeine in the earlier part of the shift, so by the end of the shift it's wearing out of your system. And then maximize light exposure, so aim to take some walks and keep yourself alert. Obviously it's difficult on a night shift to, you can't go out in the light, but if there's some bright lights in the office or in the factory, keep yourself sort of well lit so that you feel more alert, and then you can sort of darken things down as you come to the end of the shift or to when you get home. After the night shift, we'd recommend having a light snack about 30 minutes before you go to bed so that you don't wake up hungry, something nice and healthy. Resist the use to use electronics and keep the phone in a different room. And aim for a 1 to 2 hour morning nap after the night shift, and then try to re-establish normal patterns as quickly as you can, unless you're obviously doing regular night shifts, and then you can put that routine in place. So just some helpful tips hopefully for anyone that does do shift work, because actually shift work and having to persistently do shift work can impact our health and well-being, making us more at risk of weight gain, diabetes and so on. So anything we can do to encourage good sleeping around that will help us to maintain our health and well-being. So just as we come to wrap up, sleep can, as we've seen, can impact our both physical and mental health, with most adults needing 7 to 9 hours sleep each night. It's important to recognise the signs of sleep deprivation and speak to your GP or health professional if you feel poor sleep is impacting your mental health. And there are a range of health and wellbeing habits we can implement to improve our sleep. I'd just like you to all think about one thing you could do this week to improve your sleep. And if you would like to put that in the chat and share your suggestions with one another, that would be lovely. So just while you're adding those comments to the chat, I've just noticed a couple of people said that they use earplugs. So that's another really useful tip if you do have a lot of noise from a partner or neighbours or outside, and that can be something that can help you get to sleep. And playing sleep tracks like rain sounds can help people to drift off. Sometimes that's just that white noise or some gentle music. So in terms of something you can do to improve your sleep this week, not having tea after 5 p.m, that's a great suggestion. Or thinking of our happy place, not going to bed on an argument, that's a great piece of advice. So not going to bed wound up and cross. So trying to talk that out, or at least park it to a point where you can leave it for the next day and have a sensible discussion when things have calmed down. Using podcasts with someone who has a soothing voice, thank you. I've got a recommendation here for an app called Headspace. So Headspace is a mental health app which has got some different sort of breathing exercises, meditations, and bits of music on. So it's really about sort of playing with what works for you. Sticking to a routine, guilty of staying up late. I think we can all be guilty of staying up late, trying to cram too much into our evenings. So thank you so much for sharing all those tips there, everybody. So we will share this resource here. So we've got a top 10 sleeps resource, which we'll send out. So I've covered these points in the session tip, but we'll just send these out to you as a sort of little handout so you can keep hold of those, and it'll be a prompt for you to remember some of the top things you can implement. And here's some general resources which you might find helpful. So if you are struggling to sleep, the NHS does have a sleep assessment quiz which you can go on online, and the NHS Every Mind Matters website has a lot of information about mental health and sleep. As we said, it's Sleeptember, so the Sleep Charity has a national helpline. You can ring up and speak to people between 7 and 9 p.m. On their website, there's a whole range of information, easy to read articles, sleep toolkit, sleep positions, blue light, and more. So lots of information you can read up on things that might be affecting you. As we've mentioned, the Headspace app and the NHS have a number of bedtime meditations and calm meditation that might be useful for some as well. A few links for particular topics, so menopause, insomnia, sleep apnea. So do have a look at those if they're of interest. And if you do shift work, there's some particular advice from the HSE which might be useful. And just to add, a sort of my role works with the Healthy Workplace programme. So if you are an employed person, your company has an employee assistance provider, many of those helplines will also provide sort of counselling or support around sleep. So if you do need some extra help, either reach out to your health professional, try your employer's support line, and there's also the local Release the Pressure helpline as well, which is a mental health support line. So if it's mental health or sort of stresses and worries that are concerning you and affecting your sleep, there are sources of support out there which we can reach out to. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording now. So actually, Sean, could you stop the recording now? And then I'm just going to stop screen sharing and give opportunity for anyone to ask any questions if they've got anything they want to ask.